1996, Bellevue, Washington. During the past 30 years, now 50 years, millions of men have supported equal legal rights for women. But now the time has come for men to support equal legal responsibilities for women to go along with their equal, and in some cases superior, legal rights. For a long time, feminists have wanted to do more than just mouth off, whine, and rattle political sabers. Since the 1970s, more women than men vote in general elections. The femagogues know it, and they're itching to mobilize these voters to give them more than just clout in Washington. They want power. In the May 1996 issue of Elle magazine, M.G. Lord emphasizes how gender will affect who votes for whom. Quote, by the numbers, I mean the gender gap or the difference between how women and men vote. In a recent Wall Street Journal/NBC poll, male voters were deadlocked on President Clinton and Senator Bob Dole. But among women, the president led 54% to Dole's 36%, close quote. Indeed, the goal of the Freedom Summer 96 voter registration drive, according to Lord, is to, quote, recruit enough women voters to make the gender gap count, close quote. The feminist pundits feel the time is right to begin their push for power in earnest and set the political agenda for the next century. Quote, we had to send a message to politicians who are afraid of the right wing that we are mobilizing, and that we have the strength to defeat them in November if they don't stand up for our rights. Together we will make it the year the gender gap, the race gap, and the wage gap made the difference at the polls and with the polls, close quote. Patricia Ireland, the National Organization for Women. They intended to make 1996 a political watershed for feminist extremism. We cannot afford to let that happen. We need to send a strong, clear message that the one-sided war is over. A warning shot across the bow, if you will, to get their attention. Here and there, men's and fathers' organizations have been rattling the sabers of male discontent for almost as long as there has been a feminist movement. And always organizations like NOW and Ms. and feminist academics, feminist legal services, the press, and others have retaliated with harsh reprisals. Saber rattling won't cut it anymore. If we're going to get anyone to pay attention to our issues, then men need to mobilize the male vote. In the last general election, a few million men spontaneously rattled their sabers in unison, and the media went wild. The specter of angry white men made front-page news as wags everywhere worried that Atlas had finally decided to shrug. But the angry white male came and went as the media quickly replaced it with lurid assertions that while, yes, lots of men were still disgruntled, their ire was dwarfed by the unselfish wrath women feel on behalf of others. Yeah, right. According to the Washington Post National Weekly, a roughly equal proportion of women and men are grumbling. They're just upset about different things. Women are bent out of shape because so many families are living in poverty, so many children are criminals, all men are pigs, and dogs and cats are sleeping together. Oh no! Men, on the other hand, are perturbed because we're catching hell for it all. Like it's all our fault that the feminist-dominated courts are biased in favor of awarding child custody to unemployed women, or that they then drive men to the brink of bankruptcy, that men are to blame for the neoliberal-dominated programs that have led to a growing ghetto of fatherless minority families with a concomitant increase in inner-city gang violence, or that more and more employers are implementing feminist hiring policies that marginalize merit and elevate diversity quotas that brush men aside regardless of race. Hell hath no fury in all that. Question is, how will all this fury rain on the political parades this coming November, or in 2016? Note, we all know how that turned out. Clinton won and is often credited with the economic bubble created by Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan. Continuing, to his credit, Bill Clinton at least gave men and fathers an ear. He was more sensitive to man's issues than any president since President Johnson laid waste to inner-city neighborhoods with his Great Society. And Hillary even wrote a book extolling family virtues. Hooray for her! But what besides a presidential-caliber performance of political posturing have they done for us lately? Quote, from the male point of view, feminism turned the battle of the sexes into a war in which only one side showed up, close quote. Ronald K. Henry, as quoted in The Myth of Male Power by Warren Farrell. Well, it's time men showed up. It's time we started voting to save the country from feminism and the rest of the progressives on both the left and the right. What if all the local male candidates are feminists and the only decent ones are women? Well, this isn't an invitation to set aside all judgment. We want to make a resounding political statement, not shoot ourselves in the foot. We have a political weapon and we need to use it. Decades ago, feminists declared a gender war on men, and although they still claim underdog status, today they are the status quo. They dominate on most college campuses and more corporate campuses, and few courts of law or politicians ignore their demands with impunity. Meanwhile, the mainstream media and most of our other major institutions ignore virtually every refutation of their lies, no matter how well documented. The results are equally well documented. Our schools, universities, and workplaces are increasingly hostile to men. More girls and women graduate from high school and obtain college degrees than men. The unemployment rate for men continues to lead that for women. Most of the homeless are men. Most convicts are men, with black men leading on a per capita basis by a wide margin. Families, especially minority families, are disintegrating while feminists say this is a good thing. Crime rates, divorce rates, and the number of single, never married men are all increasing. Crimes committed by women, especially crimes against men, are trivialized or ignored. Men are treated like vicious criminals for even the least offense against women. Men still die younger than women, commit suicide more often, are raped in greater numbers in prison, where hardcore criminals prey on the meek and non-criminal elements convicted of minor, often victimless crimes. And amidst all this, feminists continue to complain that it's a man's world, that men dominate and oppress women. This sounds like it was written yesterday, doesn't it? But I wrote this almost 20 years ago. How nothing has changed. Continuing. While our public school system continues to serve males less than it serves females, the American Association of University Women, or AAUW, runs ads in the national media to decry how public education oppresses girls. See Time magazine, April 1st, 1996. While the vast majority of those diagnosed with AIDS and who have tested positive for HIV in America are men, Ms. Magazine demands that most of the HIV-related research in America focus on women because, worldwide, close to half of the victims are women, and when you include third world countries, most of the new victims are female. Ms. Magazine, March-April 1995. While every study that has examined the behaviors of men and women in objective surveys concludes both sexes initiate domestic violence at equal rates, on television and in theaters, more and more movies portray men as violent abusers and women as their victims. The list of offenses against men is long and continues to grow. Obviously, there's a need to confront the malignant misandry of the New Rage women and end their campaign of hate against men. Old-timers in the men's and fathers movements like Richard Doyle, Professor Dan Amnius, Frederick Hayward, Warren Farrell, Mel Fite, Tom Williamson, Dr. Roy Schenck, George Gilder, and many others will say, "Do tell." Years ago, they engaged the enemy, mostly with hands extended and hearts open to invite gender peace. But there have always been a few voices calling for something more, a stronger, more militant reply to the mavens of misandry. Periodically, Richard Doyle of the Men's Defense Association and publisher of The Liberator suggests men and fathers should go on strike, as in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. MGTOW? But most shy away from this as too extreme. Others, like representatives of the Sovereign Patriot Group, urge us to use the commercial lien process as guaranteed under the U.S. Constitution to assure our rights. But this never worked. Ray Turnus of the Family Preservation Alliance in Seattle saw his liens denied or disregarded by the King County courts, who value the Constitution less than the status quo. There are many voices, some calling for peace, others for war. According to the New Rage women at Now, I'm one of the war hawks. They claim I'm pro-male. They claim I'm a pro-male man who stands steadfastly opposed to women's rights and foursquare for the patriarchal domination of women. What a crock! Pro-male, yes, I am. But when has pro-male ever been synonymous with anti-female? Can't you be both? I think so. What I know is that I'm not opposed to women's rights. On the contrary, I steadfastly support equal rights and equal responsibilities. After completing my books on gender issues and sexual harassment, I joined the fracas early in 1993 with publication of The Backlash. Sounds aggressive. Many take its strong criticism of the feminatics as self-evidently misogynistic. Many have tried to persuade me to become all the feminists would have me be. But I have always preferred the assertively reasonable approach to anything more stringent. That was 1996. 2015, Olympia, Washington. Here we are, almost 20 years after I wrote that, and things have gotten only worse. Feminism dominates the progressive neoliberal domestic agenda on the left, while corporate interests dominate the progressive neoconservative global agenda on the right. And both are coming together to subordinate us to a globalist agenda through agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which subordinates our few remaining legal rights as members of our respective nations to international bodies that promise to do to us what the bureaucrats in charge of the European Union are doing to Europe. I know many of you do not believe political action can save us, and I'm not going to harangue you about that. Some of my heroes agree with you. But if you're going to side with them, and the time may come when I do too, then for your own sake you need to do what they're doing. But I've covered that in other videos. One thing you want to keep in mind is that while the next several years will probably be very rough, we are in the Kondratiev winter, I always mispronounce that, and after the winter comes the spring. That's all for now. Check out the other videos, subscribe to the channel. For The Backlash at backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mechelen.